We're listening to the sound of Paul Horn, musician, making music in the upper chamber of the Great Pyramid of Giza. Take a moment to absorb the resonance of this chamber. Well, good evening, friends. Welcome to another evening of spiritual science as social activism and self-initiation. Welcome to the Loft tonight here in beautiful downtown Toronto in the autumn of 2019. I'm very excited to continue our Down the Rabbit Hole of No Return series that we began last month, exploring ancient technologies and past mysteries for modern living, and wanting this to be not only an informative series, informative learning, but actually transformative learning. The knowledge that we can gain in this conversation is going to be transformational. And that's why it's down the rabbit hole of no return. You're not going to return back to who you were at the beginning of this transformational learning series. Very excited again to have one of our experts in the midst who wants to remain anonymous. So we just refer to him as Bob. The reason he wants to remain anonymous is because he doesn't want his wife to know where he is tonight. He thinks that he's at the bar drinking with the boys and playing pool. But if she knew that he was here divulging great mysteries and covert information, she would be bloody irate. Right, Bob? Right. So, tonight we begin our second in the series, looking at the electric aspects of the ancient Egyptians. And we began last time with looking at this book called Electric Ancient Egyptians, written by James Ernest Brown, who has recently published in the last 3 years 3 wonderful books that he has put together of his own accord. And he's become something of a personal hero to me, I feel, because he began back in his early 30s with this curiosity to understand what was going on in Egypt, ancient Egypt, like WTF, right? So in 1978, he went over, he organized a tour of 11 people, scientists and experts on this and that, and began photographing every aspect of the monuments, the monoliths, the architecture, the iconography, and has released in this series of 3 books. So, and I received an email from him this morning saying, great, he's happy with what I'm doing, giving his blessing, wants to know if I need any other information. And I'm thinking maybe with the next talk, we'll see if we can get him on a conference call, on a Skype call, to have him interviewed a little bit. So you might be wondering, why in this series I am choosing to go into a subject that is probably one of the most greatly covered subjects in books and on YouTube. You don't have to look far on YouTube to find all sorts of videos and conjecture around this subject of ancient Egypt. But it compels me because there's something about that time that really needs to re-emerge in this time. And the second book that we're going to look at tonight, called Fire in Middle, Mystery of the Great Pyramid Solved, is compelling in itself. Can we actually solve the mystery of ancient Egypt? James Ernest Brown, his background is as a builder. He's an award-winning builder from Colorado, United States. And he has ideas, and there's also another book that I've been referencing, The Giza Power Plant by Christopher Dunn, and his background is as an engineer. So they bring, a particular mindset as a builder, engineer, mechanical-minded people, which I think has furthered the conversation quite a lot in exploring the mysteries of this monolith. But does it completely touch all the different aspects? As for myself, I have a different background. I have a background in spiritual science, esoteric studies, world religions, and also in biogeometry. Myself, Bob, and Laura, and also Rose. We're all graduates of the advanced program in biogeometry that was started by Dr. Ibrahim Karim. Not a bad source when delving into the subject. Dr. Ibrahim Karim, an architect from Cairo. Not a bad neighborhood to be in when it comes to talking about the mysteries of that time and that part of the world. This is his first book, Back to a Future for Mankind. Really concerned with taking this knowledge and making it relevant for the present and going into the future. This is his second book, called Biogeometry Signatures. So that's some of my background that I bring to the table. So I'm excited. I think we should get into it. And actually, to take a moment to recap what we looked at last month. Just a brief recap when we looked at the first book, Electric Ancient Egyptians, subtitled Manipulating Atomic Structure with Human Electricity. We're looking at their understanding and appreciation of the electricity in the human body. Never mind the pyramids and the structures, but they were working with all sorts of things, and that a lot of what is in the imagery was actually technical manuals. The iconography and the hieroglyphics was actually put there as technical manuals to give a description on how to work with the electricity in the body and static electricity. So, for example, we see often Egyptians standing like this. Is this a form of greeting? No, it was a form of healing. They had their own understanding of working with the body's energy, similar to what we see in Chinese medicine. They had their own form of Tantra, Kundalini, and so forth, and knew how to transmit energy from the body for different purposes. We saw how they had set up chairs that were ungrounded and had people sitting in them with their feet off the ground so they could electrify the body, they could amp up the body. And King Tut's chair was an example of that. The chair that was found back in the 1920s in King Tut's tomb. And lo and behold, my wish has partially come true to own a King Tut chair of my own. Somebody came along and said, oh, here's the King Tut. I guess I just wasn't visualizing it big enough. And so I got a little King Tut chair. So I have to keep dreaming bigger if I'm going to actually manifest the real one, because there is a place in the States that makes replicas of ancient artifacts, and they make a replica of King Tut's chair, and James Ernest Brown owns one himself.
Wow.
And puts it in a Faraday cage that he created. So I was thinking, this place might be a good location for one. And I was looking online. Matter of fact, Amazon has got one. It says not currently available, but I think that's because when you order it, they actually make it after you order it. You put in the order, they make it. So anyways, I clicked on it. It's been sitting in my shopping basket.
Wow.
The King Tut chair has been sitting in my shopping basket for a few weeks. And lo and behold, it was like $3,000 Canadian, free shipping. Because, it's being provided through Amazon. So $3,000 and free shipping from Amazon. It's been sitting in my shopping basket. And lo and behold, this last week, I went and looked at my shopping basket, and the price dropped
Whoa.
to $2,000.
Whoa.
They want to give it to me.
Yeah. Wow.
So anyways, I have to really think this through seriously. Do I want to click on the order button? But maybe we need to talk about a GoFundMe campaign or something first, because I wouldn't be the only one sitting in the chair.
That'd be pretty awesome.
Someone else could be sitting here in the King Tut chair, getting electrified. Yeah.
Wow.
I'm seeing some thumbs up, so we'll have to talk afterwards. Faraday cages. That they had their own version of Faraday cages that the ancient Egyptians, the Egyptologists rather, just called ceremonial chambers, right? That they built these little wooden rooms for doing some sort of ceremonial chamber. Yes?
What's the function of a Faraday cage?
Faraday cage is to create a electromagnetically stable, clean environment that's not influenced by external ambient energies.
It's like completely neutral. So you're not being influenced by any stray fields that might be in the area. So it's kind of, I don't know, I think of it as like an energetic version of tanking or something like that.
Yeah. So they could put someone in there with their feet up off the ground, so they're ungrounded, and they can amp up the electricity in their bodies, because they realize that we're not just biochemical beings, we're electromagnetic beings. And this is something that Western science and Western medicine is understanding more and more, the importance of taking care of yourself as an electrical being and how to do that. Batteries and capacitors, that they were creating batteries back in ancient Egypt, and they could hook them up in series to create considerable voltage. And
just to put a number on it, in one of the installations, the calculation is that they could generate 3,000 volts. So we're not talking like toy program here. It's like serious voltage.
Wow.
Wow.
I'll keep your ever ready bunny going and then some.
Sorry.
And that, of course, they had very high level knowledge of celestial events. Like, it's astounding what they actually understood in terms of astrological events going back, I don't know, 4,000, 8,000, 12,000, thousands of years. I mean, it goes back a lot further than what Egyptologists think and archaeologists have been telling us for quite some time. Just 2013, the Bosnian pyramids have been dated at 27,000 years old. Yeah.
Wow.
So they've had this incredible knowledge in the past that somehow has been lost. And that, in fact, with this knowledge, working with celestial events, working with electricity, they may have even been manipulating atomic matter. And in some of the images that we looked at, could have been images of atoms sitting on their transforming tables along with the other items, and that ultimately they were collecting electrified sperm from the pharaoh and using that as part of the transformation alchemical process to manipulate atomic matter. Because of the nature of sperm, which is electric to begin with. Every sperm has electricity in it. And so to amplify that and use that, because we know sperm penetrates eggs. Well, could sperm be used to penetrate atoms? When it's in a particular celestial moment of things where a quantum leap could take place in the exchange of electrons between atoms. So that's kind of where we got last time with the previous book. And now we are going to move on to Fire in the Middle, The Adventure Begins. There's James Brown. Kind of like a modern day Indiana Jones. So, but I joined the ranks. It's Indiana Jesse. And you're joining me. We're going to join together in this exploration to ancient Egypt and looking at one of the great wonders of the world. As a matter of fact, the Giza pyramid is considered kind of the honorary #1 wonder of the world. And it was certainly the largest structure in the world up until, the Eiffel Tower? Something like that. If this thing goes back thousands of years, it's astonishing how big this thing is made. It's like out of 2.5 million blocks. 2.5 million blocks that were put together. A lot of them are limestone from that area, because this area is all limestone. And
all these pyramids sit on a plateau of limestone. So that was the most accessible rock, but again, there's other types of rock.
here's the 3 pyramids on the Giza plateau. Some of it, the more important parts of it, were made of solid granite that was transported from 500 miles away in the south part of Egypt, in the Aswan area, brought down the river, ferried down the river. These huge blocks. I forget how much they weigh, but tons and tons, like 70.
I think 60 to 80 tons, the plugs were that.
Yeah, 60 to 80 tons each. Here's a picture of the 3 pyramids. And there is Cairo. That's Cairo right next to this city. It's like right on the doorstep of these pyramids. But Cairo didn't always extend to that point. In fact, what used to be there when these pyramids were functioning was the River Nile. The River Nile ran right there. The River Nile now is here. But the River Nile used to run here. And that all changed when they built the Aswan Dam back in 1971 to the tune of $1 billion to create lots of electric power. But here's a picture taken from 1919. There's a plane flying overhead. But here is the River Nile, right next to the Great Pyramid of Giza. This is referred to as the Giza Plateau.
And keep in mind, if you go back in time sufficiently, there was even more water in this area, and it was not a desert.
No, was not a desert. Could have been a tropical area.
Or at least subtropical.
Subtropical. But what happened? Can you say climate change? The climate just keeps changing, right? So it changed. But here's where the River Nile runs now. And there's the Great Pyramid of Giza. And here's Cairo. And that's not due to climate change. That's due to the Aswan Dam being put in, which forced them to move some of these ancient monuments. And to Dr. Kareem's chagrin, like, these monuments were moved from sacred spots. And when I say sacred, I mean like power spots on the earth, and just kind of like put over there to get them out of the way of the flooding of the dam. All right, journey through the Great Pyramid. There is.
Hang on a second. They moved. What did they move?
They moved like huge statues and
The largest statues were at a place called Abu Simbel.
Yeah.
You've seen them. They're like the pharaoh and his, I can't remember, his wife, and they're huge. I
Yeah.
mean, this was a major UNESCO effort to move these miles and miles because of the flooding.
Wow.
And there's also temples that were completely flooded. Everything didn't get moved. Some things are underwater
Because of the dam.
because of the dam. Because the water backs up behind the dam.
Yeah.
they cut up these statues.
Yep.
Took them apart and reassembled
Oh.
them
Jeez.
somewhere else.
Oh.
It's like, let's take them and go put them in Disneyland or something. Hey, John.
Hey, how you doing,
Welcome. Good.
Good to see you. You're on it.
Yeah. So there's James Ernest Brown and his, I'm sure, the unsung hero, his wife, Deborah. So we'll take just a quick boo here at the schematic of the Great Pyramid of Giza, which, okay, let's take a moment to do a poll. You know, what have you been told about these pyramids? What is their purpose and function?
That they were burial grounds. Or like
Burial grounds?
tombs, yeah.
Tombs? Anyone else ever hear that?
Yeah.
We've probably all heard that.
Yeah, we've all heard that. And if you went to Egypt and you got a licensed guide, you would be told that they were tombs for pharaohs, that they built these massive monolithic structures as a burial place for one person. Not even with the wife. The wife was, the queen was buried separately. And this is what they're told to tell the public. To be a licensed guide, you got a script and you can't go off the script. Unless you like pay them some money and they'll tell you some other things. But to be a licensed guide, you've got to follow the script, and this is what they say, that these are tombs. Let's look at the schematic here. Now, does that look like a tomb? You've got, there's a shaft here, you've got this thing in the middle, which they call the king's chamber. And then there's this thing down here, and then there's this other chamber here, which they call the queen's chamber. And you got a shaft coming off here and a shaft coming off of here. And then there's this descending thing comes down here. And this is the ground here. And then there's this other thing going down the ground. And there's this other chamber here. And they're all finely carved. Except for this one. this is not so finely carved. So, and then here they call it the entrance. This is the entrance way up here. You got to climb up here. And so what they say is that, when the pharaoh died and they had this thing all ready, it took 20 years to build his burial spot. They carried him in a sarcophagus, this huge granite box that weighed tons and tons, and brought it down here and brought up here, which is only 4 feet by 4 feet. Sarcophagus wouldn't have been able to fit there.
Mm-hmm.
And then the funerary people pushed it up here and then into here, which they call the Grand Gallery, and then up into here, the antechamber, and then into the king's chamber, and that little dot there is the sarcophagus. And because, and then when they came in, they pushed these 3 4-ton blocks down here to block the exit. Not sure why, but that's why there's these 3 blocks here to block the exit. And that the funerary people were actually going to be entombed with the king. They were going to die in there. But the builders, being kind-hearted, didn't want that to happen. So this shaft here, this rough-hewn shaft, was built as an escape route. So after they took the king in, put him up there, they could escape out somehow and live, and they wouldn't die in the process of putting him in there. That's the storyline that you get. James Brown back in the 70s goes, this doesn't make any sense. I got to go over there with my camera and a team of people and photograph everything, look at everything, take samples of everything. This guy's my hero. Like, this is amazing. Like, back then they didn't even have digital cameras. Like, the 70s was like this technical stone age compared to what we have now. So, all right, there's this little schematic.
Just to throw one other thing, I mean, the first thing to look at is, if that's the purpose, look at the angles. The angles are completely wrong for doing what they're talking about doing with it. Like,
Wrong and impossible.
well, yeah. Like, why would you want to make it that difficult? Sealing it up, sure. But inside it? No. Doesn't make sense.
Apart from the fact that they've never found a mummy in any pyramid anywhere.
Technical detail.
It's a technical detail. But they hold to the story that they're tombs. And that grave robbers broke in to find, all the possessions, took all the possessions. Oh, and let's take this dead body with us as well. Maybe we could sell it on eBay. So, this was the conundrum that he started from. Here's another schematic showing, okay, this is the north side, this is the south side. The alignment of this is within 1/63rd of an inch precision with due north. 1/63rd of an inch precision with due north. Yeah, the positioning of this is important in terms of where it sits on the earth and also celestial alignment. And the angle, this angle here is 52 degrees, or to be exact, 51 degrees, 50 minutes, and 40 seconds, which is rounded up to 52 degrees, which is an angle, I guess the typical angle of a pyramid that produces what they call pyramid power, that generates a particular kind of frequency. This is 52 degrees, and these, this is 26 degrees, and this is 26 degrees, what they call the descending passage, and this ascending passage are 26 degrees each, which we'll find out has special properties as well. Down here we see limestone casing. Look how precisely cut those are. This is part of the mysteries, how they cut things so precisely Or were they actually casting these in a mold to make them this way? That's another possibility. They're actually taking ground up limestone, carrying it up and casting it and letting it harden in place like this.
Or melted rock.
Melting, yeah. You can melt it with boiled vinegar. And that's what the grave robbers did in, what was it, 1100?
Mhm.
Al-Mamun
Right.
and a team thought, oh, there's a pyramid with a mummy in it and all sorts of, riches, gold and whatnot. So in the 1100s, they broke in, and this is actually showing you the original entrance up here. Yeah. So there's the original entrance up here, and this is where Al-Mamun forced entry. Oh, it was actually in 820 CE. And a bunch of them took boiling vinegar and created this entrance. They didn't really know where they're going. They missed this entrance. This shows that they have a block that swings, a heavy, heavy block that actually opens on a lever quite easily.
And the reason they missed it was so perfectly made that it just looked like the wall. There was no differentiation that you could spot.
This shows where Al-Mamun broke in 820. There's the original entrance, and he came in, and they were digging through, and by sheer luck, or maybe it wasn't sheer luck, maybe they were using pendulum dowsing, which I learned from Dr. Kareem through biogeometry. Talk about this a bit more later. They were actually then eventually able to find their way to the ascending passage and get in. Why there's stains on the wall of this grand gallery that we just looked at on the previous page? It's not from candles burning, and it's not from torches.
It was from temperatures much higher.
Much higher temperatures than that. Yeah, dark stains. This is these shafts that lead out of this upper chamber, and dark stains. This is going up the north side of the king's chamber, and there had been something there that had been broken off at this hole. Yeah, here it shows then up on top of the pyramid, at the other end of the shaft coming out of the upper chamber, like a vent. It's only 8 inches by 8 inches. It's not something that, like, why? What's that about? Any speculations? That's right there. That's looking into it. And there's James Brown down on the ground. It usually takes about an hour to climb up there. It's against the law, but people do it anyways. You just hand a few American dollars to your guides or guards, and but James Brown used to go when he had a guide he'd go with who could go up there. He could go up in less than 5 minutes and down in less than 5 minutes. They called him the champion. Yes,
Can I offer?
please.
Is that does that have something to do with the sun's alignment, like coming into some sort of alignment with that opening, that then it can be into the chamber, either the sun or the moon or both?
Yes, he. This is what one of the things that James Brown says is that the shaft. Well, on the south side. Now we're looking at the south side. He calls it an air vent. And of course, the south side would receive the most sunshine. Here's the sun crossing over the south face. And at certain times of the day, the sun would be able to penetrate down in there, would certainly send heat down that shaft. There's the bottom of the south vent, again with this stain from high heat. And something shattered around that. There had been something fastened there that was removed. Probably one of the few things that Al Mamoon and his grave robbers found to take, something metal. It must have been very disappointing back in 820 CE to get in there and find an empty box. Well, it's not empty there because there's James Brown lying in it, lying in this sarcophagus, so-called sarcophagus, in the so-called King's Chamber.
Well, also when you look at that, notice there's no decoration on it whatsoever. Which, again, if this was the place you're going to bury the king, I think there would have been some decoration, some hieroglyphs, something. And of course, if it was a box, where's the top?
James Brown, he writes, when he did this, when he was lying in there, he had an experience. He says, my consciousness was taken over by a purple whirlpool. It looked like a spiral galaxy. And the most wonderful, compelling feeling came over me. I had the overwhelming feeling that I was going home. I felt like I was being lifted out of my body. The purple spiral was pulling me, and I did not care. Suddenly, I sat straight up, and everything seemed to stop. This is so fantastic. Matter of fact, last night here we had a class for higher school, part of the spiritual boot camp trainings, and we're working with a training manual called Awakening the Third Eye. And it's about practices to activate the third eye, based on the pineal gland and the tunnel, the atom tunnel that goes from the front of the head to the back of the head. And so the practices are about activating this psychic center. And part of what you experience, you get vibration, but then when it becomes activated, you begin to see purple space. This is often the color of astral space that people experience when the third eye becomes activated. As he was experiencing, he said here, I experienced this purple whirlpool. And part of the training is learning how to connect with vortex energies. To be able to gear into vortex energies and allow them to pull you through the astral space. This is what he was experiencing. He felt it looked like a spiral galaxy, and the purple spiral was pulling me in, and I did not care. I felt like I was going home. So this is a great clue, actually, of what this space is about. That and ultimately what all of this stuff is about shifts in consciousness. To you could say, get your consciousness outside of the box. He had to get into the box to get his consciousness beyond the box. Right? And that's why we've come into the 3D realm. We've come into this shoebox of an existence to learn how to get beyond the box. But how? And that's part of the clues we're following here on this path.
One clue to keep in mind is remember purple. Purple will appear again.
And here, he recorded the sound that was made when you pounded on the side of this granite box. Just hitting with your fist. The granite resonated, and the chamber is a resonant chamber. That's part of what those 5 tuning forks were above. And he recorded it, and when he took it home and looked at the recording on the oscilloscope, he thought how interesting. It looked like the Eye of Horus. And it's true how frequencies generate patterns. You know that from cymatics, if you've studied cymatics. It's fantastic. You just go on YouTube and look at cymatics and how different pitches and harmonics create incredible harmonious patterns. So that's James Brown doing it. And then here next to the Great Pyramid, this field next to it, which the Egyptologists refer to these mounds as mustabas, or tombs, or burial ground. That, you know, all sorts of people were being buried next to the pyramid. They've never found one body there. WTF? Doesn't make sense. Why are they continuing to perpetrate stuff that doesn't make sense? So there's like 100 of these identical mounds.
And they're not tiny.
And they're not tiny.
This is roughly the size of a football field. Just to put it in perspective.
Now there's his guide,
Dancing.
Defnawi, and there he is running up. The champion's running up like 5 minutes from the bottom to the top. Okay, next clue on the path is the pyramid's connection to the Nile. And as I showed you earlier on, the Nile used to run right next to the pyramid. Well, you can see this is an artist's rendering. The Abu Sir necropolis and 3 pyramids and the water running here. So just take a quick look at this. We'll come back to this, discussing how there was a connection with the Nile and in the area. There's all sorts of, you can see here, there's the pyramid, there's the Sphinx, and then the Valley Temple. They call it the Valley Temple. Those were those structures that were on the banks of the Nile. And they don't really know what this is about. There's all these chambers with these pillars. There's erosion stains on the walls of these columns in the Valley Temple. Like, what is this built for here? You know, why is this next to this so-called tomb? Here in the Valley Temple, you've got a door at a level that would have been underwater in the past.
The other water source that's referred to is there's a lake called Lake Moeris, M-O-E-R-I-S, which at one time could have also been a water source. Mostly dried up now.
Yeah. Huge lake. I mean,
It was a huge
It was
lake.
like miles and miles big.
Mhm.
Yeah. So now, shafts, wells, and cavities. Another big mystery that's not explained. And there we have this field of mounds next to the pyramid. And then all sorts of mysterious holes. Tunnels that are just circulating all over the area. And James Ernest Brown, he's talking to the guides and stuff, they'd say, these guides would say as children, they used to be able to play in these tunnels. They'd go, like that was their playground, that was the park. They'd go, hey, let's go play in the tunnels and stuff. A lot of them have been closed off, filled in. A lot of them not even discovered. Matter of fact, there's been about 135 pyramids discovered in Egypt. Only about 20 of them are recognizable as pyramids. The others have just disintegrated. But some people say that they've only discovered about a third of the stuff that's there to be unburied, that's been covered with sand over the centuries, over the millennia. They've only uncovered a third of what's there. And they continue to do excavations and digging. It's particularly hard to find the tombs because when they did bury their kings and pharaohs, obviously it was not in the pyramids because they've never found a body there. They would dig into the sides of hills and create, the tombs, and then they would cover them over so they wouldn't be found. So grave robbers wouldn't come and disturb them and take desecrate, the sacred tomb.
And sometimes they would cause landslides to completely fill the entrance with like huge rocks that could not easily be moved.
Look at this. There's the pyramid in the background. They've got a chamber here you could fit a couple of houses in. What's that about? WTF.
Sorry, the one in the circle or underneath?
Here.
There.
That circle is showing a person, just to show you the scale of the size of this cavity.
I think in general terms, what we're really trying to show here is that this was done on an industrial level scale. This was not just for small ritual purposes.
Yeah. He's showing here how cavities of this level could be used as holding tanks because they were close to the River Nile, so water theoretically could have been brought in there one way or another, or from Lake Morris, and or groundwater brought up because this was a plateau, or what do you call it, a kind of an estuary on the edge of the Nile.
Yep.
And there's actually dozens of pyramids lining the banks of the Nile. This is not the only one, but this is certainly the crowning glory. Here he's showing a 17th century diagram where this sort of thing could be used as a water elevating device. If you have a huge tank of water, pressure could be used to raise water to a higher level, which is the same thing you find in town still with the water tower, right? You've got a water tower and all this water sitting up there, and the pressure of that distributes the water to the homes in the area. More clues on the path. So we'll take a little look here at typical Egyptian pyramids. By the way, this one, this is the Great Pyramid. Looks kind of rough on the outside because back in the 1100s, there was a huge earthquake that basically shook all the casing off of the Great Pyramid. It had been covered with limestone casing. The whole thing basically is solid all the way through with limestone, except for those chambers and passages that are made out of granite. So you got layer upon layer of limestone. But during the earthquake, it got shook off, crumbled down to the bottom, and most of it has been taken away. A lot of it was used to rebuild Cairo after the earthquake.
They managed to find a few bits of the casing at the very base because it had been covered over by sand, and that's how they know what it was covered in. At the time, one of the statements that people had made was at its peak that it would shine like the sun. Now keep in mind, imagine not something brown, but something white. Completely smooth, polished on all four sides. So it would have been like a sun that happened to be
Yeah.
right in front of you instead of up in the sky.
Yeah. Well, there's something to that. Like, it was a sun chamber in a way. It was working on solar power. While I saw Graham Hancock do a thing recently on the dimensions and how the dimensions are an exact scale of the Earth's dimensions. How they knew that 4,000, 6,000, 8,000 years ago, how they knew where to place it, you know, where north was, things like that, might have something to do with, this is actually a biogeometry pendulum that I got from Dr. Kareem. This is something he designed himself as a biogeometry tool, which I took the classes, but also much of this is explained in his book on biogeometry.
Which I highly recommend people read.
Highly recommend. Very readable. And it's nothing to do with what it's made out of, the materials. It's just, you know, a composite metal thing, but it's about shapes and numbers. There's numbers of discs here and different shapes that allow it to tune in to particular frequencies more readily, better than what you would get just using a quartz crystal or, you know, something you buy from the store. This was designed by Dr. Ibrahim Kareem, so it's called an ICA. Ibrahim Kareem Universal Pendulum.
Keep in mind, it is detecting a specific energy, but it is also, it's not a neutral observer. It's actually generating from the tip a bit of that same energy that it's looking for. So by actually using the pendulum on something, you are energetically improving that thing, not just measuring it.
Isn't that with the BG3 pendulum that does that?
Both.
You know, all of them.
Oh,
do it,
that one
'cause
as well?
It's,
Okay.
it's coming out at the point,
Yeah.
at the bottom.
It's an emitter.
Yes.
Like last time I passed around the Jed Wadge made out of wood, and it's an emitter off of the end, because shape and number generate frequencies. And when you have something designed in a particular way, it's going to have particular frequencies. He shows how, a picture in his book, a photograph from, I think it's the Cairo Museum, and it's got pictures of pendulums. And in the Cairo Museum, on the description, it just says, unknown objects for ritual. The Egyptologists don't understand this stuff. They can't.
They pretend to not understand that.
Yeah, maybe.
What's that?
Maybe they pretend to not understand that.
Mhm.
Just to not. I mean,
Well,
some of them maybe aren't even don't understand.
This
Maybe a
is
lot of
this
them-
is this part, like there's a suppression. And you get into the rabbit hole around this, and it's really a conundrum why the Egyptologists and the Ministry of Egyptian Antiquities aggressively opposes these ideas and suppresses them. And there's parts of Egypt that are not promoted and not accessible to tourists because there's stuff there that they don't understand and they don't want to have to explain. Especially some of the high-tech stuff that they were using. So there's an agenda, and this is why we're doing this tonight, is because we need to understand this stuff. We need to resurrect this knowledge in this day and time, because we're plugged into fossil fuel like, you know, addicts on heroin. And we need to break the fossil fuel habit. We're killing ourselves, we're killing the earth. This is a matter of survival. This is not a luxury to sit here. I'm so thankful you're sitting here and learning this stuff. Not informative learning, but transformative learning, so that we can really become more active with this knowledge. And there are, whether it's the Department of Antiquities in Egypt or whether it's dark forces that, is in a war against consciousness, we need to get active and alive and transform things.
I mean, just to put it in perspective, the Smithsonian Institute has done identical type things to what the Antiquities Department has done in Egypt. There's all kinds of North American things where they have got things and they put it away in a box. It's like the end part in the Raiders of the Lost Ark where they say, oh yeah, we're going to look at it. And then you see the guy carting the wood box into a room that goes on forever of wood boxes that nobody's doing anything with.
No, that's the reality.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, our institutions of higher learning, known as universities, are some of the worst places for the dispensing of knowledge. And
the
suppression of knowledge.
The open examination in a non-judgmental way of what truth really is, not some pre-constructed concept that you're trying to prop up and keep alive with tape and so forth.
Yeah, a little bit of Scotch tape.
A little Scotch tape.
So I'm just going to do a little bit more, then we're going to take a break. Just looking at this section here of typical Egyptian pyramids. Here's
Jesse.
some examples.
Can I just ask a question? We're talking about the casing of the pyramid that fell off. Did he say anything? Was there a capstone that was made of a different material or not? Or did he say anything?
He doesn't
about
talk about it. And I've heard various opinions on that. And that, there could have been a capstone made of gold.
No, that's not.
And there's certainly an argument, and I'd like to come back to that later when we start to talk about, how the overall structure sits between the higher, the cosmos and the Earth's center, and what that's about. Even right here, we could talk. He's talking about how there's electricity that's in the Earth. The Earth, is full of electricity. The Earth is constantly being electrified. It's being hit with lightning bolts thousands of times a day. Earth is constantly being electrified through lightning in the above that's coming down. So like the idea of some sort of capstone like gold, and gold is one of the best conductors, is certainly a good argument for that there was a gold capstone on top, and that might have been something carried off by thieves. But not only can electricity come down, like this thing sitting out in the middle of the desert, right, is quite likely going to be a lightning rod and get electrified quite regularly. But the shape of the pyramid is also drawing electricity up out of the earth and focusing it this way. So there's really this marriage between heaven and earth in the shape of a pyramid. And you've probably heard of, sorry?
I was going to say there's also just the structure, the physicality of the structure is generating both piezoelectric and pyroelectric. So processes going on could generate pyro, just meaning from heat you can make electricity. But piezoelectric can be made just from pressure. So let's start thinking about how big a structure this is. How much pressure is being placed on blocks within it. That charges the structure just by the sheer weight of it sitting on it. And different types of materials create piezoelectric in different ways.
But certainly it was a structure that could contain some very interesting activity. And here's some nice pictures of what the complex might have looked like. Pyramids, and then these conduits down to what they call the valley temples.
Egyptologists call them causeways.
Causeways, yes. So it's quite a complex here of things when you reconstruct from the archaeological artifacts. So let's stop right there before we get into the mineral analysis of the inside of the pyramids. Let's take a 10-minute break. Hear the echo?
Yeah.
And the tone of that hitting the sarcophagus is concert A.
Wow.
It's tuned to concert A. 440.
Or concert A is tuned to it.
Right. So, back to the past and back to the future for mankind. Chapter 7, Mineral Analysis of Past Presence of Water from the Nile. So, in a nutshell, yes, there is mineral analysis of the presence of water from the Nile. Here is a picture of James Ernest Brown examining samples of the Serapeum back in 1978. And what they're there he is again. Like, this guy's my hero. Like, he photographed every inch of ancient Egypt. Well, not ancient Egypt. I mean, the artifacts from ancient Egypt.
And measured.
Measured, yeah. And then went back again and again to remeasure. But they did, in fact, find samples of salt. What's sodium chloride, I guess, is the technical term.
No, it'd be sea salt, so it's more than just sodium chloride. It's
Okay.
full, like it's complete.
Complete.
Minerals in it.
And the Nile, which flows from the south and bring water from the south, actually flows into the Mediterranean Sea. And in that area, the salt from the Mediterranean Sea would mix with the fresh water coming from the south. The Mediterranean Sea is at the north. And so there'd be a mixture of fresh and salt water, which would give them access to the salt. Why? Chapter 8, we're going to look at, take a little departure here, to just look at what the real tombs look like, the real tombs of the pharaoh, which were in a different part of Egypt, near Luxor, in what they call the Valley of the Kings. There's the Valley of the Kings and the Valley of the Queens. And so here, there is a tomb built into the side of this hill, this mountain.
What a beautiful rock formation.
Mm-hmm. Looks like it's being excavated. Here's a schematic of it. Doesn't look anything like pyramids. Okay, so here you've got the inside of pyramids, and here's the inside of the tomb. Do they look the same? Same thing again. Pyramids, tomb. Look at all that for the burial of the pharaoh.
Who isn't there?
Well, some of the tombs were broken into by grave robbers. Again, this is what the inside of pyramids look like compared to the inside of tombs, which are much more ornate. and spacious too. Look at that. There's a section of the tomb of Ramses VI. A lot of space for the pharaoh, but that's the way they treated their pharaohs, the kings, because they were considered the embodiment of a deity, and so they were given all the regalia of a deity. Beautiful imagery, such fine detail. Spent a lot of time just looking at some of that. So now on to chapter 9, granite vessels, so-called sarcophagi and so-called king's chamber. There's James Brown again inside.
Notice the staining again.
Staining, yes. And also notice holes. There's holes here in the bottom of the granite vessel. Why would you have a hole in a vessel where a mummy was going to be placed?
And it was the bathtub.
Yeah, look at the sides of this. Again, with holes along the side, holes on the inside. In this case, there is actually some carvings in them. Look at the side. This is one that's in the British Museum. That sarcophagus compared to the size of this person standing there. What in the world were they doing with these big...
Again, these are all granite.
After Mr. Brown got back from his first trip, he saw in the newspaper in California an article about radioactive storage study. Granite caverns were being eyed. It was back in the 70s, 1978, that this was kind of a clue on the trail for him about granite caverns on the planet considered as a place to store radioactive material. And in fact, he was given this amulet when he was over there, this heart-shaped amulet next to a quarter, that's to show the size of it. And he took it to a jeweler and had a thing put on it so he could wear it around his neck. And one day he was walking along carrying this Geiger counter, and the Geiger counter accidentally went past the amulet and started to beep. And so here it's showing this is a modern Geiger counter. Normal background radiation would be 21. Here he's got his amulet sitting on the Geiger counter, 87. This granite amulet was holding radiation in it. Very high amount of radiation. 4 to 5 times higher than what would be the normal background radiation. Okay. Similar pictures here showing electrified water. I won't take time, but there's all sorts of imagery showing that they were electrifying water and potentially carrying them in these vessels, which we'll get to here in the next chapter.
The shape is very important.
Amphora vessels. Amphora literally means carried on both sides. And these things would be carried with a yoke and straps. They'd be carried because they weren't to be put on the ground. And we looked at this last time when we were looking at the vessels, the batteries and the capacitors in a certain shape, because if you put it on the ground, whatever's electrified in it would discharge into the ground. So these amphora vessels had stands like this, and there's lots of them you can see in different museums. They have the shape, and then they would sit like that. So here we got a picture of an amphora vessel sitting in a wooden stand. He's not sure exactly what's happening, but it could be a healer here that's administering electrified water out of this through a straw, and here's the assistant administering it to this guy. Or maybe it's a family picture, and here's the wife and here's the child helping dad have some beer after work. Which is entirely a possibility because the Egyptians loved beer. They didn't invent it. I think it was the Babylonians discovered beer. And like so much of what the Egyptians had, it was actually inherited from earlier cultures.
Earlier.
Yeah, much earlier, possibly. If you want to consider that a lot of this knowledge came from Atlantis, and there's definitely reason to consider that a possibility, that Atlantis was a very high civilization that self-destroyed, self-imploded, but had very high level of technical knowledge, and that's why there's books written like Forgotten Origins and The Missing Lands. So a lot of this knowledge, we should really consider that the legacy of it is such an incredible civilization that lasted so long, and not just the 30 dynasties that we have in recorded history, but even before in the pre-dynastic times, that the knowledge came. The beer was discovered by the Babylonians, and in fact, there's a good chance that the pyramids weren't even built by the Egyptians. The knowledge and the building could have been done quite a bit before the Egyptians came along. So here's more of these amphora vessels. And here they are on cargo ships, stored and hanging so they wouldn't discharge the electrified water.
Now keep in mind they use these amphora for all sorts of things. Oil, wine, a number of other liquids, essential oils, all those kinds of things. There is another little, I'm going to biogeometry side to this, is that not just were they not grounding, but the shape itself energizes what is inside it. So it's taking whatever you put in is better when it comes back out. I mean, they've actually, I think in some of the amphora that had wine, I think they even drank some wine from some of these ones that weren't broken. This wine was like 2,000 years old or something like that, and they said it was still good.
Wow.
Does it look anything like this?
Mm-hmm.
Clue. All right. Now, chapter 12, crystals, magnifying lenses, and visible force fields. Won't spend a lot of time in this, but there is definitely indications that they were working with crystals to magnify things. Interesting little story that James Brown tells about when he went in 1978 to the museum in Cairo. They had a room, and the entrance to the room said unknown objects. And there was all these crystals that were in there, shaped in different ways. And of course the Egyptologists didn't know what they were about, so they were put in the room with unknown objects. He came back, I think it was in the 80s or 90s, and he was very excited to go back to that room and explore them more, and he got there, and there was nothing there. And anybody he talked to didn't know anything about them. They had disappeared, even the administration of the museum, it's like, no, we don't remember those. So again, important clues being lost, being taken, maybe even stolen. I mean, there would have been some value in those crystals. So if somebody on the shady side wanted to make some money, they could have taken those things and sold them on the black market. They've done a lot, really, to destroy evidence, clues, including cleaning the inside of the pyramid, scrubbing off the stains, scrubbing off, like you saw there, the black stain above the shaft going out of the upper chamber.
Mhm.
He had a photo of that in 1978. When he went back, it had been cleaned off.
Right.
This is important archaeological evidence that we're being deprived of. And here's a Kirlian photograph of pyramid energy.
Wow.
Kirlian photography is able to capture the energy, like you can get your aura photographed,
Subtle energy.
subtle energy photographed with this particular type of photography called Kirlian photography. Been around since, what, the 60s maybe? 70s?
In Russia, maybe even a bit earlier, but it became popularized in the 60s. Yeah.
So it's showing how pyramids emanate energy. And look at the energy that's emanating upwards. That's why you should have pyramids in your home, in your space, to create beneficial energy. Because we're being inundated more and more and more and more with all sorts of stuff, including the rollout of 5G. In a city like Toronto, it's like really concentrated and just being compounded all the time. So working with biogeometry, shapes and whatnot can help remediate this for health benefits as well as to sustain consciousness. I went and got a juice at Veghead on Dundas Street this afternoon, and the guy said, "Oh, I haven't seen you for a while." And I said, "Oh yeah, well I get out of the city from time to time." And he says, "Oh, that's good. You know, like everybody's in this kind of what do they call it, smog head." He says everybody's walking around smog head now with all the electromagnetic radiation and the wireless technology. Like that was his comment this afternoon. Like we're really suffering from stuff and we're not even aware of it.
Are you going to speak to the actual shape of the pyramid? Not that it's not a four-sided.
Well, that's a good point. Do you want to talk about that, the Great Giza Pyramid? The Great Giza Pyramid is not actually four-sided. It's eight-sided. Yeah, and it's shown here in this picture. This is a side. There's a very subtle indentation on each of the four sides, actually making it eight-sided. Maybe for the next talk we can bring out more of the biogeometry and the spiritual aspects, because we're going to do one more talk in a month on his third book. Don't want to give away too much. Well, I kind of am here because look at this. The Great Pyramid fits the profile of a type of chemical laser.
Mm-hmm.
And you're all going, "Oh, what's a chemical laser?" Well, let's have a little look here. Well, he puts here a patent in 1980, U.S. patent for a chemical laser, a closed cycle chemical laser, and apparently there's been a couple of hundred of these patents that have been put in, and you can't get a patent unless it works. Apparently, it has to be demonstratable as a working thing in order to get a patent. So, yeah, there's chemical lasers that are patented and being used in certain ways. We're in the last chapter, at least the last chapter of this book, before we, next month get on to the conclusion of it all. and additional things we'll bring in. But here he's got the mystery of the Great Pyramid solved, and so he breaks it down here, bit by bit. All right, so here, source of power. The source of power is the pyramid itself. That's what he's circling here, is the pyramid. And south side here, you got the sun. It's got this curling photograph showing how pyramids got power. Somebody's got a patent for a thing you can put your razor blades in a pyramid after you use it, and you'll get 200 shaves out of it instead of like 20. Pyramid power for your shave. Back, I think it was in the 70s or 80s, the Maple Leafs were using pyramid power. They were all putting their hockey sticks under a pyramid before a game. You remember that? Anybody remember that?
I guess they stopped.
Yeah, they started to dig up a gym line.
Yeah, they should do it again.
Yeah.
Pyramid power. Optical source. The sun that passes by every day with its rays, its radiations, its warmth, and so forth.
Sorry, he makes the point here also that in the idea, this goes back to the use of crystal at one of the, what we considered an exit point, but it's really an entry point, in order to begin to heat the interior of the pyramid in a specific way, which will...
Right, yeah, he's suggesting a crystal could have been put at the top of this shaft, this vent.
So think about it. I
That
don't know
would
if you're a
magnify.
kid and never played with a magnifying glass, like, you know, when I was a kid, we used to do bad stuff like burn ants and stuff like that. But basically the idea, when you concentrate that heat, that light, sorry, you'll get a tremendous amount of heat.
So he's suggesting that's a possibility, that light and heat. I'm not so sure I agree with that. But nonetheless, it is a shaft between this upper chamber and the outside.
I mean, the other thing that struck me, though, is he's talking about this chemical reaction happens at 114 degrees Fahrenheit. That's like nothing. There's probably days in Egypt where it's that's the air temperature. So it wouldn't be hard to make this chemical reaction, whether you had a crystal or even if you didn't some days.
Yes, very good point. It wouldn't be hard to get this machine going. So next, number 3, mixing vessel. That's this granite vessel. Is it a coffin for a dead body? Or is it a basin used for chemical, alchemical processes to take place? And certainly we saw heat burn on the inside, at the entrance to the shaft going up. Something volatile was taking place in this chamber, in this vessel, potentially which could have blown this corner off. If they were like really playing around with stuff, that could have been what broke the corner of this granite vessel. Separating chamber, right? This is all going back to that picture of the.
Sorry, I just want to go back to one little part, which was you're using fluoride crystals.
Oh, we're jumping ahead here.
Well, that's in 3.
Is it? Oh, okay. Go ahead.
You're heating up to 114 degrees to sublimate, in other words, basically melt these crystals. And that is generating, remember I told you to remember purple?
Right. There you
You're
are.
creating a purple gas. So this is the beginning of the chemical reaction. So I'll let Jesse continue.
Right. Thank you.
And these crystals were they're not like a rare thing. They could easily be found in Egypt. It wouldn't have been hard.
We should go back. Also to point out that as a source of power, the pyramid is receiving, it's channeling energy up. You can see the energy going up and out. It's tapping into the telluric currents within the Earth. The telluric currents are the movement of Earth energies, I guess electricity in the Earth from the Earth's own vibration, which
Again, there's a whole bunch of things going on here. One thing that's causing telluric currents is the actual movement of the crust, and inside we have the core, and they are not moving at the same speed. So there's an electric charge given to the crust of the Earth based upon the movement of the core. That's a pretty wild concept in my mind.
Yeah, the telluric current, which is a low frequency current that travels underground and underwater, and it shifts direction every 12 hours. So there's this alternation of this telluric current that the pyramid's sitting on, that it's tapping into the power. In this mixing vessel, James Ernest Brown, he says that just an example is they could be putting fluoride crystals in there, and then the heat, it would start to
Turn into a gas.
turn to a gas, and the gas would travel. Okay, so the separating chamber is going from the sarcophagus in this upper thing, and then it goes into this antechamber. That's the separating chamber. It shows here you're looking up, and the gas could travel up these columns up into this open space. That would then there's an exhaust system. Okay, so let's talk about the exhaust system, which would relieve some of the pressure. So some of the gas can escape out here. He's saying that heat and light is coming in here, exhaust is going out here.
And you would want to exhaust it if the process started going too quickly and you're creating too much activity.
And then we're seeing the effect of the heat on the exhaust system. Through this alchemical reaction of the fluoride to the heat is producing a type of pyroelectricity. Fire can actually produce electricity. This past summer, I was in the park after the drum circle. Some guy pulls out this gizmo and he sits it there and he starts putting leaves and twigs into the bottom of this kind of like a can. And he lights it, ignites it, and it starts burning in this can. And then he plugs his smartphone into it
Oh, wow.
to recharge the smartphone,
Cool.
That's
Yeah.
awesome.
using fire to produce electricity to charge his smartphone. That's
Wow.
pyroelectricity,
Well, if the grid goes down, well, that's what we may be doing.
which is one of the reasons why, burning everything we can to keep that smartphone going.
Even if
Don't take away my smartphone. Anything but.
Withdrawal leads to all sorts of things.
So this is why he's suggesting that pyramid actually is pyramid, fire in the middle.
Oh.
Creating this fire. So what happens next? So some of the stuff goes out the exhaust system. Then there's this oscillating chamber. This is called the Egyptologists call this the Grand Gallery. That runs from here, from the antechamber in the exhaust system, down to here. And forget how long this thing is, but it's quite long. 150 feet long. 150 feet long going down. And that at one point there was something attached to the sides of it that got broken off and taken.
27 on one side, 28 on the other.
Right. Uneven number, which would create an oscillation, positive and negative. So this is why he calls it an oscillating chamber. The things that were attached could have been made of gold or silver or electrum, bronze. Probably, he says, it's probably the only thing of any value that the robbers found in there was these metal pieces in this oscillating chamber. There's a photograph. of it. Now they've got a stairway going along there because it's at 26 degrees. And we know that if you take a rod at 26 degrees and tap it on the ground pointing it north, it becomes magnetized. Well, there's the north side, and here's this thing pointing down towards the earth at 26 degrees. How did they figure that out? I think it had something to do with this. A whole lot of dowsing was going on back then, but you never hear that from an Egyptologist.
So the thing to remember too is that this oscillating chamber, you're getting a tremendous energetic process occurring here because you have all these charged particles and they want to do stuff. So again, remembering that they're charged and they're in a thing that's charging them, and they're probably reaching ever more powerful levels as time is passing here, depending how long they're inside the chamber.
Yeah, the way it says that there's a positive negative charge on the two walls, which is exciting the subatomic particles, which would bounce back and forth, gaining power. So it's gaining power as it moves down. It's being pushed down as it gains pressure and expands. Then what happens? Then they bring the dead pharaoh in and put him in his place. Now they need a gas source. And so that's coming from this chamber, the so-called Queen's Chamber, with this gabled ceiling. And in here would be the source of hydrogen gas needed to catalyze this whole thing. And hydrogen would be produced by electrolysis. Electrolysis in a saltwater environment. This is really kind of the battery of the thing that makes the whole machine work. Is that you've got salt water in here, or salt residue, and then it needs electrolysis. Well, where's it getting the electricity from? This is the piezoelectricity, or piezoelectricity, however you want to pronounce it. Piezoelectricity is a form of electricity that's generated through pressure. So you have the pressure of all this granite that's being activated by the telluric currents coming through the earth. And in a minute, we'll get to look at how there's also the current of the River Nile being channeled in here, bringing salt water. And that's going to create electrolysis, which is going to separate the oxygen from the hydrogen. And then the hydrogen will work with the
Purple gas.
The purple gas of the fluoride and create the chemical laser. What's going on with the River Nile? Well, they call this the ascending passage, which is wrong. This should be the descending passage because the chemical reaction is pushing the chemical laser downward. They call this the descending passage, but this should really be called the ascending passage. They got that backwards too, because you've got water coming in from the Nile. There's actually, they've found entrances coming into the earth underneath the pyramid, underneath the water from the Nile. And I suppose these could have been dug when the Nile was receded, because the Nile floods every year, or it used to flood once a year, this major inundation that would bring this water down to this area and soil and replenish the whole area with this rich black topsoil, which gave them the minerals, rich source of minerals to do their alchemical work.
I mean, just to give you an idea, that soil, the Nile begins in Ethiopia and then makes its way down and eventually ends up in Egypt. But there's topsoil washed all through that whole route.
Yeah. And this dark black topsoil, rich in minerals, and was originally Egypt's name was El-Kem. Al is mean out of, and Kem was the area, at least that area was called Al-Kem because it was rich in chemical deposits or mineral deposits. And then it later became called Egypt. But that's where we get the name alchemy. There's 3 granite blocks right here on what they call the descending passage. But it really should be called the ascending passage because you've got water coming in. The water's coming in here from the Nile and from other sources. There's all sorts of, as you saw, chambers and shafts and tunnels here, but he's just simplified it, showing how it comes in through one pipe, then the pipe gets narrower, which means it's going to accelerate the flow of water. It's got this subterranean vessel here, which he doesn't explain, but my idea around that is that the Nile is going to be bringing all sorts of debris in, wood and vegetative matter and fish and whatnot. So it would get caught here in this catchment, and down here it's all rocks. So it's like a drain catchment that will catch any physical matter in the subterranean vessel and drop it down here, and it can be cleaned out when they stop this functioning and they do a cleaning of it, because it would have to be cleaned and maintained from time to time.
I mean, one of the other things he talks about, not in great detail, is the fact that, we've talked about fluorite crystals, but that there could have been a number of other crystal reactions created as well, designed to do different things. But
Yeah, many different
we don't
things.
know.
And we're looking at his idea on it, and we're looking at this idea of a chemical laser. But I know the Egyptians and their people before them were multi-dimensional beings that were living on different levels simultaneously. And this is really just one level. The Egyptians were an incredible civilization because they really lived at a time of balance between the heavens and the earth. There was incredible balance in their knowledge of the forces of the cosmos, and they were really understanding more the forces of the earth, so much so that they were actually able to create beer. How great is that? And chemical lasers to make electrified water.
Or as he calls it, earth milk.
Earth milk.
Electric beer.
And exactly. I would entirely believe that they were making electrified beer out of their electrified water. Why not? And you better hurry to patent that idea before I get there, because it's the next thing coming is electrified beer. They're trying to make all these different kinds of beer, but we're going to make electrified beer. And we're going to call it Bolt. This bolt's for you.
Oh, that's fantastic.
And of course there'll be like a light version called Jolt. So you better race me to the patent office, because it's the next thing coming, electrified beer. But how did they do it? So these granite blocks, there's 3 4-ton granite blocks. They call them plugs. Right here where they call it the descending passage, but it's ascending because the River Nile is coming up here, and you've got this chemical laser coming down here. They say that these plugs were put in there after they took the dead pharaoh in, and the funerary people were put in there, locked in with these 3 plugs. But think of it. You've got 3 granite blocks, solid granite blocks. You've got a chemical laser putting pressure from this side, piezoelectricity, and you've got the River Nile channeled up here at 26 degrees, about 26 degrees. That's pounding from the other side. You've got this one in the middle being pounded from both sides. It's really like a piston. It's really like a piston that's creating piezoelectricity. That's electrifying the water, and then it's exiting out they call it the entrance, but this is really the exit where you showed that limestone door
It's like a flap.
would flap open and allow it to come out into, they had moats for one thing. We missed that picture, but they had moats around the pyramid with boats in them. They found the remnants of boats in these moats right next to the pyramid. They were all covered with sand, but in the last few decades they've excavated them out, and there's a boat museum right next to the Giza Great Pyramid. Here is an artist's rendition of what's taking place here. Well, what is taking place here? Because I really want to apply this to our human lives,
Right.
and to show this is an archetype, or a larger scale. They were working with ideas that now really need to be applied into understanding ourselves.
Right.
And this is the point of doing this, is to understand what they understood and apply that understanding, not in the same way like going out and building pyramids and chemical lasers, but how to evolve ourselves to work with these ideas and these processes within ourselves. So we'll come back to that, because there's multiple levels going on. But just at a basic level, looking at this picture, where the Nile is running by here, the Giza Plateau, you've got these three pyramids, you've got the Great Pyramid, where water has been brought in underneath. It's been electrified with different chemical procedures, and then exits out what they call the entrance, and come down these causeways to what they call valley temples. But I don't know that they're temples at all.
Looks like a dock to me.
Well, yeah, they were exporting this electrified water in these amphora vessels to be used in different places for medicine, for elixirs, for health. It was electrifying the body, the human needs. We all need, to attend to our electrical nature. We need to attend to the amount of salt we have in our system. That's something to consider. One of my teachers says Robert Kubrick says we're salt deprived. We need good salt and minerals in our system.
I mean, give you an idea, in biblical times, the best quality of salt traded even for gold.
Mm-hmm.
That was not some foolish thing they did. It was actually a really smart thing they did. So we should talk a bit about earth milk, like their description of it.
James Ernest Brown, he calls it earth milk when it comes out.
In fact, I don't know if you guys caught it, but there's a bunch of pictures where they're wearing earth milk t-shirts with different shots in it. Anyways, I think it's good to just talk about body electricity just briefly. So I have a friend who runs a clinic, and he tests body electricity. He does a bunch of other things, but to give you an idea, he deals with a lot of stage 4 cancer patients. So galvanic skin response, hook up electrodes, skin, stage 4 cancer patient. Charge, on average, 30 millivolts. Keep that number in your head. So, I, for example, drink spring water. Well, I've taken that spring water direct to his place and had him measure again. Put electrodes in the water, what's the charge? The charge varies between 250 and 300 millivolts. So that's just a small example of what they were doing on an industrial scale. I mean, keep in mind, they were basically able to have thousands and thousands and thousands of people, and every living thing in Egypt basically benefiting from this process. I mean, that's just an unbelievable concept. Producing
Lots of this earth milk, electrified water, like way more than what Nestle is doing.
Well, they're not making electrified water.
No, they're not making electrified water. They're just taking it out of the ground and putting it in plastic balls. Here, they're taking it out of the river and potentially returning it to the river as well.
Well, absolutely.
This cycle of taking something that's given to them by Mother Isis
and
her blessing.
improving it.
And we want to keep in mind that, well, they kept in mind that the gods were involved in all of these stages, all these processes. This was sacred work. This was not just like an industrial plant the way we treat water of Lake Ontario and make it drinkable again. Like, this was connecting multiple dimensions together simultaneously. But yeah, this completing of the circuit by returning this back to the river.
I mean, we talked before about the silt washing down every year and the mineralizing. So as the charge in the body is increased, the ability to uptake elements from the water, dissolved elements, increases. So in other words, they were making the nutrition more bioavailable by coupling the silt on the crops and the electrical charge that the people were consuming.
Yeah. And there's ways to do that today,
Yes.
which we will get into next time about how to apply this. But to just finish off this picture and close off this evening, my own personal view is that this water coming down the causeway, sure, some of it was going into the river, some of it was being exported to other areas as elixirs, as medicine, but this is his artistic rendition. I think they probably had spas and bathhouses down here, pools, where, like people maybe were swimming here on the beach in the Nile and, playing with the crocodiles. Or they could have gone into the bathhouse and been submerging their body in electrified water, or swimming pools with electrified water. That this was a healing center.
Right.
People would come here, like here you've got this giant, gleaming pyramid producing what the Greeks called lustral water. Oh yeah, they called it lustral water. It was being produced by this. Yeah, I like that term. And so people would come here for healing, the healing waters. And so I think these were spas and bathhouses. And I think, why did they have moats around the outside of the pyramid with boats in them? I think it was a playground. Like they set these up for aesthetic purposes. And so, as a tribute to the boats that had brought the granite blocks 500 miles to build this thing, and then the boats that are taking this electrified water, that they put the boats around as kind of aesthetic thing. And it was like, well, honey, let's take the kids to Giza for the weekend. The kids can play on the boats. They can float on the boat. We can go to the spa, and sit in the tubs with electrified water. I bet you the sex would be good after sitting in electrified water. You'd be ready to blow your wattage then.
Well, you'd have more wattage.
You'd have more wattage then. And it's like, okay, we're gonna, we'll go, and those were probably restaurants.
Okay.
On those boats in the moats, because look at the Egyptians loved life. So this wasn't just an industrial plant. This was like an Egyptian Disney World.
It's a bit of a
Because they loved levity. They loved live life to the full. It's like, yeah, let's go there. We'll get some electrified beer. We'll have dinner in the floating restaurant there. The kids can play. On the boat at the helm. We'll go down to the spa and get electrified. And they had to bathe. They had to eat. They had to have functions. They had to have fun. And that was the beautiful balance of all the dimensions that were existing at that time, because they were full of life. They had a rich lifestyle. And I love that image of the goddess Mat. When they conceived that when you died, you went and you met with the goddess Mat, who had the scales. And in one side of the scale was your heart. And on the other side of the scale was a feather. And it was to see whether your heart was as light as a feather at the end of your life. And they wanted to live that way in the balance of gravity and levity. And so I don't think this was just an industrial complex. I think this was an entertainment center. The Giza was a massive entertainment center. Yeah, honey, let's take the kids to Giza for the weekend. You know, like go to the spa, we'll have dinner at the floating boats and electrified beer. It'll feel great. You know, and then they'll go on and look at the images of the gods. You know, like go and soak up some sacred sites, literally. And you know, like I don't want to compare it to Disney World because you go to Disney World and the iconography is Mickey Mouse and Minnie Mouse and Goofy and Pluto and SpongeBob and like it's kind of desecrated some of the sacredness of iconography in our age. But back then it would have been like a full service weekend where you get your sacred stuff, you get your healing stuff, you get your meals, you get the sauna, all that. Like, why not?